Rikers Island under siege, violence, riots, survival inside. The Hook, the siege, the city's island of fear. On the edge of New York City lies a prison so infamous, its name alone sends shivers through the streets. Rikers Island. For decades, this isolated complex has been more than just a jail. It's been a war zone, riots erupting, violence spreading like wildfire. And survival? That's the only law inmates know. Tonight we go inside Rikers Island under siege. The myth reality of Rikers. Ask anyone in New York. They'll tell you Rikers is not just a jail, it's a city within a city. A place where gangs dictate power, where guards fight battles they can't win, and where riots break out with the force of a hurricane. But how did one island become the epicenter of chaos? To understand, we must look back at the violence that has defined Rikers from the very start, the early sparks of violence. Since its opening, Rikers was overcrowded. By the 1970s and 80s, fights were constant. Guards were outnumbered and riots were inevitable. The inmates called it survival of the fittest. The city called it a crisis, spiraling out of control. First riot breakdown, 1975. In 1975, one of Rikers' earliest riots broke out. Hundreds of inmates took control of a cell block, demanding better conditions. Fires burned, guards were attacked, and the chaos lasted for hours before the NYPD stormed the facility. That riot set the stage for decades of uprisings to come. Survival inside the riots. For the men trapped inside, riots weren't about politics. They were about survival. One inmate recalled, "You didn't care about who started it. You just cared about making it out alive." Survival became the unspoken law of Rikers, a law written in blood. Escalation into the 80s and 90s. By the 1980s and 90s, Rikers wasn't just plagued by riots. It was defined by them. Gang wars, overcrowding, outing, and a city struggling with crime created the perfect storm. Every corridor echoed with tension. Every block was ready to ignite. Gangs, riots, power inside Rikers. The rise of the gangs. By the late 1980s, something new began to dominate the island. Gangs. The Bloods, the Latin Kings, and others carved up Rikers block by block. They weren't just groups of men. They were armies. And inside these walls, their power grew unchecked. Guards couldn't stop them. City officials couldn't control them. Rikers became their battlefield. Violence as currency. In Rikers, violence was currency. Every debt, every insult, every betrayal, it was paid in blood. Inmates quickly learned the rules. Show weakness, and you're finished. For the gangs, control wasn't about numbers. It was about fear. The more violent they became, the more powerful they were. The 1990 uprising. 1990 marked one of the bloodiest uprisings in Rikers history. What began as a fight between rival crews spiraled into an all-out riot. Inmates took over multiple housing units. Guards were beaten, fires lit, and the city was forced to send in heavily armed tactical teams. Hours turned into days of chaos. And the scars of that riot left Rikers shaken for years. Inside a riot, survivors' words. One survivor described it like a war zone. You couldn't breathe from the smoke. All you heard was screaming, metal clanging, people fighting for their lives. You didn't know if you were going to make it out. For many, the riot wasn't just about violence. It was about survival in its rawest form. The guard struggle. Correction officers were not soldiers. They were city employees, underpaid and undertrained, suddenly thrust into war. Many left the job after riots, scarred by what they saw. Those who stayed learned one truth. Inside Rikers, control could collapse in minutes. The cycle of retaliation. After every riot came retaliation. A stabbing in the mess hall. A beating in the showers. Every act of violence was answered with another. The gangs thrived on it. The guards struggled to contain it, and Rikers spiraled deeper into chaos. The 1995 explosion of violence. By 1995, violence inside Rikers reached its peak. In that year alone, hundreds of assaults on staff and inmates were reported. One officer recalled, "It felt like every day we were waiting for the next explosion." And when the riots came, they were bigger, bloodier, and harder to stop. The new millennium, same old violence. As the new millennium dawned, city officials promised change. They said reforms would calm the chaos. But inside Rikers, nothing had changed. The gangs still ran the tiers, the riots still erupted, and survival was still the only rule that mattered. Gang hierarchies behind bars. Every gang inside Rikers had its hierarchy. Leaders gave orders from solitary confinement. Soldiers carried them out in the yard. Even when locked down, the gangs found ways to communicate. They controlled contraband. They controlled protection. And in many ways, they controlled Rikers itself, the silent hand of retaliation. Retaliation became an endless cycle. A fight in the morning could mean a stabbing by night. Officers described Rikers as a pressure cooker. Every insult, every debt, every betrayal could explode into violence at any moment. The 2001 riot that stunned the city. In 2001, a massive riot broke out across multiple housing units. Inmates turned tables into barricades, set mattresses on fire, and attacked officers. Dozens were injured, and the riot lasted more than 24 hours before the facility was retaken. For New Yorkers, it was a reminder. Rikers wasn't just a jail, it was a war waiting to erupt. Guards outnumbered, outpowered. For the officers, the riots were nightmares. One described, "You walk in and there's 50 of them and 5 of you. You don't think about law or order, you think about survival." Many never returned to work after these riots. The cost was too high. Inmates speak. Every day was a riot. One former inmate recalled, "People think riots happen once in a while. Truth is, every day felt like a riot. Some days it was a fight, some days a stabbing, some days the whole block went up. You woke up not knowing if you'd go to sleep that night." The media's spotlight. The media began to circle Rikers like sharks. Every riot became a headline. Every stabbing, every fire, every escape attempt was front-page news. For the city, it was a black eye. For the inmates, it was just another day. A culture of survival. To survive inside Rikers, you needed 2 things, strength and allies. Alone, you were prey. With a crew, you stood a chance. It wasn't just about serving time. It was about making sure time didn't serve you. The unseen toll. Behind the violence and riots were broken lives. Inmates wrote desperate letters to their families, describing a world where fear ruled every moment. For them, Rikers wasn't just a jail. It was a daily fight to stay alive. Scandals, reforms, the cycle of violence, the promise of reform. In the early 2000s, after decades of riots and bloodshed, city leaders swore Rikers would change. They promised reforms, new training, better oversight, safer conditions. On paper, it sounded like a new era, but inside those walls, nothing was new. The cycle of violence continued. The Kalief Browder tragedy. Then came a case that shook the world. In 2010, a teenager named Kalief Browder was jailed at Rikers, accused of stealing a backpack. He spent 3 years on the island, 2 of them in solitary confinement. He was never convicted, but what he endured exposed the brutal reality of Rikers: endless violence, isolation, and despair. Kalief's story would become a symbol of everything broken inside Rikers, the culture of solitary. Solitary confinement was sold as a tool for order, but for thousands at Rikers, it became torture. Locked away for 23 hours a day, with no human contact, inmates broke down mentally. Some rioted to escape the silence. Others lost themselves completely. The 2013 Department of Justice report. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Justice released a damning report. They found a deep-seated culture of violence at Rikers, especially against teenagers. Beatings, excessive force, and gang retaliation weren't accidents, they were daily life. The report was proof of what survivors had said for decades. Rikers was under siege from within, officers under pressure. One former officer admitted, "We were outnumbered, underpaid, and afraid. You either got tough or you got hurt." Some officers joined the violence just to survive. Others looked away. The line between guard and inmate blurred, and the cycle of brutality grew stronger. Riots of the 2010s. Throughout the 2010s, the riots never stopped. In 2015 alone, thousands of violent incidents were recorded: stabbings, slashings, full-scale uprisings. Even as reforms were announced, the reality inside the blocks remained the same. Rikers was a powder keg, and every day, someone lit the match. Voices from the inside. Inmates described the island as a jungle. One said, "If you don't fight, you don't eat. If you don't fight, you don't sleep." Every day, someone's getting cut. Every night, someone's screaming. These voices weren't just stories. They were warnings. Warnings the city kept ignoring. The hidden toll on families. Behind every inmate was a family torn apart. Mothers waiting in line for hours only to see their sons bruised and broken. Children growing up with fathers locked away in chaos. Rikers didn't just destroy the lives inside, it bled into homes across New York. Scandals, reforms, the cycle of violence, the flow of contraband. Reforms couldn't stop what was already flowing freely inside Rikers. Contraband. From cell phones to drugs to weapons, everything made its way in. And often it wasn't smuggled by inmates. It was correction officers paid off to look the other way. Corruption fed the violence. The officers' double life. One former officer confessed, "Some of us became part of the gangs. We delivered packages. We protected certain inmates. It was money, survival, and power. Once you crossed that line, you weren't just a guard anymore. You were in the game." June 15, 2017, a surge of violence. Between 2010 and 2010, Rikers hit one of its most violent peaks. Slashings, stabbings, and mass fights flooded the reports. In just 2 years, the number of violent incidents rose by nearly 50%. For the inmates, it was survival. For the officers, it was fear. For the city, it was a crisis spiraling out of control. Survival stories from the blocks. One former inmate recalled, "I slept with a weapon every night, not because I wanted to hurt someone, because I knew someone was coming for me. You don't sleep easy in Rikers. You don't trust anybody. You just survive." Political pressure mounts. By the mid-2010s, Rikers wasn't just a New York scandal. It was a national headline. Activists demanded the jail be closed. Families of inmates marched on City Hall. Politicians, once silent, began calling Rikers a stain on the city's soul. The city promises closure. In 2017, New York's mayor made a historic announcement. Rikers Island would be shut down, replaced by smaller, safer jails across the city. For some, it was a victory decades in the making. For others, it was just another empty promise. The violence continues. But even as the city promised change, the violence inside didn't stop. Riots, stabbings, and corruption carried on them. And for those trapped inside, closure felt like a word, not a reality. The toll on everyone. By the late 2010s, Rikers had destroyed lives on all sides. Officers left broken and traumatized. Inmates scarred and hardened. Families torn apart. The island had become more than just a prison. It was a wound, one that New York couldn't ignore any longer. Collapse, COVID, the final siege, the calm before the storm. In 2020, as the world shut down, Rikers faced a new enemy. Not riots, not gangs, but something invisible, a virus. COVID-19 was about to turn the island into a nightmare unlike anything before. COVID sweeps through the cells. Packed dorms, no ventilation, little medical care. COVID swept through Rikers like fire in dry grass. Inmates got sick by the dozens. Guards fell ill. Death haunted every block. Rikers was no longer just violent, it was deadly. Abandoned by staff. As the virus spread, officers stopped showing up. Thousands called out sick. Entire blocks were left unsupervised. Inmates ran wild. Violence exploded. Riots broke out. For weeks, parts of Rikers were left under inmate control. The island was collapsing from the inside out. Inmates trapped in filth. Inmates describe being trapped in filth. Overflowing toilets, no showers, no medical help. Some went days without food. Others slept among the sick and dying. For many, survival during COVID at Rikers meant enduring conditions worse than anything they had ever faced before. The spike in deaths. In 2021, the death toll at Rikers surged to its highest in decades. Over a dozen inmates died in a single year, some from COVID, some from suicide, others from violence. Each name became another reminder of a system in free fall. Voices from the crisis. One inmate recalled, "We begged for help. People were dying in front of us. Guards didn't come. Some of us took care of the sick ourselves. We weren't inmates anymore. We were survivors in a disaster zone." Riots in the pandemic era. COVID didn't stop the violence, it made it worse. With fewer staff and more chaos, riots became common. Inmates fought over food, over masks, over space. Rikers was already a war zone. Now it was a battlefield without rules. The world watches. For the first time, the world watched Rikers collapse in real time. Protesters demanded answers. Lawmakers toured the island and left in shock. What had once been New York's shame became a global scandal. The political war over closure. As the crisis deepened, pressure mounted on politicians. Activists demanded immediate closure. Families of inmates demanded justice. But city officials stalled. Closing Rikers meant billions of dollars, years of planning, and fierce opposition. The debate turned into a political war, while the people inside still fought to survive. Riots of 2021 to 2022. In 2021 and 2022, chaos returned in full force. With staff shortages and overcrowding, riots ripped through the blocks. Inmates seized units, fires burned, and the NYPD's tactical teams were forced back onto the island. Survival stories these riots echoed the same truth. Rikers was no longer a jail. It was a battlefield. Survivor testimony, no one was in charge. One survivor described a riot during 2022. No one was in charge. No officers, no rules, just chaos. People were fighting over food, over beds, over nothing. You felt like you were abandoned by the world, like you didn't exist. The symbol of systemic failure. By now, Rikers wasn't just a prison crisis. It was a symbol of everything broken in America's justice system. Corruption, neglect, violence, and survival at any cost. Every headline about Rikers was another nail in its coffin. Yet the island remained open, a reminder that promises mean little behind razor wire. Families in desperation. For the families, the pain was endless. A mother cried, "I sent my son there to wait for trial. They sent him back in a body bag." For every riot, every scandal, there were faces outside the walls who carried the grief. A jail without control. By late 2022, even officers admitted Rikers was beyond control. They spoke of being attacked daily, of walking into cell blocks, unsure if they would walk out. Some quit, others stayed broken and afraid. The line between order and anarchy had all but disappeared. Calls for federal takeover. The crisis grew so severe that federal judges considered taking control of Rikers away from New York entirely. For many, this was the only hope, to remove the island from the city's hands and end decades of corruption and bloodshed. The uncertain future. Today, Rikers stands at a crossroads. The city promises closure. Activists demand justice. But inside those walls, violence still erupts, lives are still lost, and the cycle of survival continues. Rikers Island is under siege, not just by its inmates, but by its own legacy. And the question remains, will it ever truly be shut down? Legacy of violence, the fight for closure. The legacy of fear. For nearly a century, Rikers has been New York's island of fear, a place meant to hold the accused, but remembered for violence, riots, and survival. Its legacy is not of justice, but of chaos. Survivors speak. One said, "I went in as a teenager, I came out broken." Another, "Rikers wasn't punishment, it was torture." A third, "You don't serve time on Rikers, time serves you." Their voices echo the same truth. No one leaves the island untouched. The guards' wounds. For the officers, survival came at a cost too. Many live with scars, physical and mental, families torn apart, lives haunted by memories of riots, stabbings, and fear. They were not just guards, they were survivors of a battlefield. Families that never heal. Outside the island, families mourned. Sons and daughters never returned home. Parents buried their children, and for every protest demanding closure, there was grief that could not be undone. The fight to close Rikers. The fight to close Rikers became more than policy. It became a movement. Activists, families, and survivors demanded justice. Their voices grew too loud to ignore. But the battle is far from over. Even today, Rikers remains open. The city swears it'll close Rikers by the end of this decade, but history has taught us one thing. Promises can be broken, and Rikers has outlived many before. The question is not just when will it close, but will it close at all? The island under siege. Rikers Island remains under siege, not just from its inmates, not just from its officers, but from its own history, a cycle of violence and survival that may never truly end. For those who lived it, Rikers isn't just a jail, it's a scar that lasts forever.